I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up Bond, James Bond, No Time to Die, the 25th installment of the iconic movie franchise. It opens this week. In a few minutes, we'll talk to Times chief film critic Tony Scott about the fall movie lineup. But we begin with New York politics. Election day finally just a few weeks off, and Eric Adams is the overwhelming favorite to succeed Bill de Blasio as New York's mayor. He became a national figure almost immediately after winning the primary, was invited to the White House in July to attend a meeting on preventing gun violence. But beyond cracking down on crime, what will be on top of his agenda at City Hall? Alvin Bragg, also considered a shoo-in to be Manhattan's next DA. Meanwhile, Governor Kathy Hochul looking to strengthen her political standing. She took over for Andrew Cuomo in August. She's been busy trying to raise millions of dollars to fund her 2022 election campaign. Public advocate Jumaane Williams considering a bid to challenge Hochul for the Democratic nomination. Tish James, the state attorney general, also said to be considering a run for governor. Let's take New York's political pulse with Katie Glueck, chief metro political correspondent for the New York Times, and Jeff Mays, also a metro political correspondent for the Times. Katie, is there any doubt that Eric Adams is going to be the next mayor?
Good to be with you. Eric Adams is the overwhelming favorite, as you noted, to be the next mayor of New York City, a reflection of just how heavily Democratic the city is, and certainly has become even more so in recent years. But then the question is, what kind of Democrat? And he has certainly indicated that, relatively speaking, on the New York political spectrum, that on many issues, especially when it comes to public safety, when it comes to dealing with business, he may be aligned closer to the center than certainly others that he may be dealing with in City Hall, which is going to be a critical tension to watch come January.
Jeff, to the extent people have been looking at issues in this campaign, crime obviously at the top of the list, certainly coming from a former cop like Eric Adams. What else is on top of his agenda? What can we expect, assuming he wins, for him to do in the first couple of months of his mayoralty?
Well, I think one of the biggest things we're going to see from Eric Adams is this, at least what he believes is going to be this sort of paradigm shift where the city is going to focus on the people who really pushed him into office, working class, Black and brown, Latino people in this city. I was with him recently in East New York, where he did a press conference calling for greater use of violence interruption techniques in East New York. And also at the same time, he was talking about NYCHA and how federal funding needs to come for NYCHA, and they need to fix the living conditions, which he believes create some of the violence conditions that we see. So yeah, I think he's going to really try to shift the focus of the city on some of the people that got him elected. He won every borough except Manhattan, and even in Manhattan, he won Upper Manhattan, which contains more Black and brown people as well. So I think that's going to be the interesting shift. Certainly, crime is really his signature issue, and as he likes to say, everything else really hinges on crime. So when you often hear Mr. Adams talk, it often leads back to crime prevention strategies for him. So in some ways, it's almost impossible to separate what he plans to do with crime from the rest of his agenda.
Katie, isn't that pretty much the same constituency that elected Bill de Blasio? He was elected by working families, a liberal constituency, a Black and Hispanic constituency to a great extent. How do we expect Eric Adams to be different? How will he appeal to this constituency in a different way? And Jeff pointed out he's going to appeal to the federal government for more housing authority funds. Of course, he's in a somewhat better position to do that now with the Democratic administration.
So certainly there is some overlap between the coalition that elected Eric Adams and that propelled Bill de Blasio to office, but there's also some key differences. And Eric Adams has been really vocal in trying to say that, especially when it comes to dealing with the business community, dealing with the city's approach to how to promote economic development. He wants a break with de Blasio, who has certainly faced some dealt with some tensions with the business community. And, de Blasio, he certainly did create a diverse coalition, but much of his coalition was rooted with success with white progressive voters. And white progressive voters tended to be far more skeptical of Eric Adams in this primary than they were of a number of his opponents. So, certainly some overlap in terms of, as Jeff was noting, the ability to connect with voters of color, folks from middle class and working class backgrounds as well around the city. But for Eric Adams, his approach was much more rooted in an outer borough strategy, focusing on those voters first. And in fact, one of the key tensions of his likely administration is going to be with some of those white progressive voters who have some real skepticism of him headed in.
Jeff, again, with the caveat that we don't want to be presumptuous, how do we expect him to deal with the city council and with the governor, whoever that turns out to be after November of next year?
Well, it's really fortuitous for Eric in many ways that we do have a new governor, because, we know that Mayor de Blasio and former Governor Cuomo had a very difficult relationship. The governor really intervened in city affairs in many ways that, a lot of people believe was not helpful. So in many ways, it's going to be helpful for Eric to be coming into office as we're choosing the next governor. He's gonna, certainly whoever's running might be looking for his endorsement and his input. On the city council side, I think this is really where it's going to be interesting. Eric has said that, as the mayor of New York City, the way he got elected shows that sort of moderate Democrats are what people are looking for. They're looking for people who want to be focused on crime, not interested in quote unquote defunding the police, as he says, but also, as Katie mentioned, business friendly and focused on bringing jobs and safety at the same time. The council that has been elected or looks to be elected is much more progressive, is going to be much further, even a little further to the left than our current city council. So it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with those sort of issues, such as NYCHA, for example. Do you sell NYCHA air rights to developers? How do you keep NYCHA affordable? Is there mixed income housing on NYCHA? Those are going to be issues that the city council, which is going to be much more center left than this current council, is certain to clash with Mr. Adams on, as well as his safety issue of policing.
Katie, what can we expect in the next couple of weeks in the campaign? There's an Adams television ad up now for the first time. Are there going to be debates? Is there going to be any October surprise?
Certainly it's possible that there may be some sort of October surprise, but I think the big thing is we're going to actually see a semblance of a campaign again. So after Eric Adams won the mayoral primary earlier this summer, he was very focused on fundraising and certainly has cemented a significant fundraising advantage over Curtis Sliwa, the Republican nominee. He did the occasional public event, but it was nothing like the kind of public schedule that we saw during the primary. And I think that we can expect, certainly in the home stretch, we will see both of them out, at least to some degree, making their case. And certainly we are already beginning to see volunteers for the campaigns getting out there and reminding people that as much as there was a lot of focus on the primary, there is still a general election to be had. So, we'll certainly see that. There will be debates, there will be early voting. And so these are the two candidates, the two nominees are two really interesting New York characters. Have been around New York politics quite a long time. And so we may see some vivid contrasts and clashes on display in the next couple of weeks.
Jeff, any indication who Eric Adams might appoint to his administration yet?
Look, I think there's lots of discussions that are going on. I mean, one name that you certainly hear all the time is David Banks, who's one of the founders of Eagle Academy, And as the school's chancellor, he's been advising Mr. Adams on education issues. And the education is one of the issues. Eric says he's going to revamp, again, focusing early, so to prevent children from later on having the sort of deficits that we've seen in the school administration. But other than that, I hear that there's a very detailed process going on, that Eric has been out talking to people. I wrote recently with my colleague Dana Rubenstein about how Mr. Adams has been talking to the Bloomberg administration, people from the Bloomberg administration, including former Mayor Bloomberg himself, to sort of get ideas about how to govern, how to approach different things. They've also spent a lot of time talking to folks in the de Blasio administration as well. So yeah, I mean, not too much news about who he's going to hire, but the process is ongoing because this is an unusual situation where the primary was in June and normally it would have been in September. So there's been a lot more time before the general election as well, but we do have to wait for that general election before he is confirmed as mayor-elect.
Katie, is Bill de Blasio seriously considering running for governor? And if he did, would he even carry New York City?
He is seriously considering running for governor. My colleague Dana, whom Jeff mentioned as well, we reported that this week that he has begun to tell people privately that he's planning to run for governor. And so, we'll see if he actually, in fact, jumps in. We've spoken with a lot of New York Democrats around the state and some in the city who believe that he would have a very challenging path forward should he decide to run for governor. Of course, he ran for president as well. That didn't go well for him. But he would have a lot of competition in New York City alone, much less the rest of the state potentially. Certainly statewide, we know Governor Hochul is already seeking a full term. She is fundraising quite a bit, trying to cement a real fundraising advantage there. But then from New York City, it's certainly possible that Attorney General James jumps in. It's Jumaane Williams, the public advocate, as you noted, has launched an exploratory committee. These are 3 people from Brooklyn alone. And so it's possible that there will be a very competitive race just for the city, much less the rest of the state.
Any way to handicap that gubernatorial race when you look at the people who may run? You have 2 women, 2 Black candidates, an incumbent Democrat from upstate. It's been a long time since a Democrat from upstate would have been the nominee. What are the dynamics of that race looking at it year out?
Well, certainly it's possible. It could be an easy glide for Kathy Hochul if people don't actually challenge her. We don't know for sure what that field is going to look like yet. Certainly, whatever happens, she will have a significant war chest. She will have a lot of advantages of incumbency. She has a lot of time still between now and June, when the primary is, to make good on a lot of policy promises, to unveil projects across the state, to continue to build on the goodwill that she does have from a lot of people who appreciate the break in tone and in approach from her predecessor, Governor Cuomo. So she's in. And then the question is, who else gets in? And the biggest question in New York politics on that front is, does Attorney General James get in? And she, should she get in, she is widely considered to be another really formidable candidate. She could be the first, so Kathy Hochul is the first woman governor in New York history. Separately, Tish James could be the first Black woman to be governor in America. And so there's also some historic dynamics there potentially. Jumaane Williams from the left, he is someone who ran a closer than expected bid for lieutenant governor against Hochul in 2018. And so there's some question about how he would do this time around. And then we'll have to see what the rest of the field looks like. But I think, to sum it up, fair to say all eyes right now are on Tish James and what she's going to do next.
Jeff, that recovery money from Washington already running out. What won't Eric Adams be able to do?
It's a little too early to sort of tell, but certainly he is coming into office with a distinct disadvantage. If you look back to 8 years ago, when Mayor Bill de Blasio came into office, the economy was doing well. The city had been on an upswing. Currently he's at a huge disadvantage. We're still trying to recover from the coronavirus pandemic, which is still ongoing. Union contracts are expired. Crime has been on the uptick recently. So he is coming in with a bit of a deficit, which is one of the reasons he has said that he is courting the business community, because he believes he needs that community. He needs a much more cooperative relationship. Mayor de Blasio very ideologically really dismissed a lot of the business community. They felt like they weren't invited into City Hall to sort of offer solutions, to offer their help. Certainly, as Katie mentioned earlier, Eric Adams has done a complete 180 on that, and is certainly going to be looking to the business community to help him earlier in his tenure. As far as federal money, there still should be some there. Some of that money is phasing in over the next few years, so he's not going to have any money to work with. But certainly, it's a very much different and difficult picture that Mr. Adams is going to be facing when he likely takes office.
Jeff Mays, Katie Glueck of the New York Times, thank you both for joining us. And coming up next, the Times' chief film critic, his picks and pans for the fall movie season. The past 18 months have been a challenging, even tumultuous time for the movie business. The COVID pandemic forced theaters to close, delayed the opening of lots of films, forced fans to watch movies on Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, among other streaming services. But theaters are reopening, movies are being released, and in-person film festivals are back. Talking about the future of movies, the Times wrote, quote, "Is this the death of cinema again, or its glorious rebirth? Or have it mutated into something new altogether, a two-headed Disney Netflix monster with art somewhere in its genome?" But there is hope in Hollywood. 91-year-old Clint Eastwood directed, produced, and starred in Cry Macho, which was simultaneously released in theaters and on HBO Max. And Daniel Craig is back for the last time as James Bond in No Time to Die, the 25th installment of the classic series that began in 1962. It opens this week, being released only in theaters. So what is the outlook for the movie business, and which films will be worth seeing this fall? We're joined by Tony Scott, the Times' co-chief film critic and the critic at large. Tony, 163 minutes in the new James Bond movie. Should it be called No Time to Die or No Time to Watch?
Well, there's a lot of time. There's plenty of time for both. I thought, as someone who grew up mostly watching James Bond on television with Sean Connery and Roger Moore, I thought it was a little too long. And while I admire Daniel Craig very much as an actor, and I think he's done some interesting things with James Bond, I do find that this iteration of the franchise has a kind of heaviness to it, and takes itself maybe more seriously than James Bond is supposed to. So there's a lot of sort of intense emotion and revenge and kind of darkness and death in this James Bond. In addition to the gadgets and car chases and witty repartee that we're used to.
Why has the franchise lasted as long as it has?
It's a fascinating thing, it is, because we live in the age of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we sometimes act as if these kind of long running franchises are something new. But as you say, this one has been going on, for more than 50 years, for almost 60 years, and has survived even the end of its geopolitical moment. I mean, it was a sort of a Cold War artifact in a way. James Bond was the super spy who was fighting various bad guys, and was also the avatar of some, what we now can see as some fairly retrograde kind of attitudes especially about women and sexuality, but it survives partly just because it did figure out the earliest ones figured out, what one of the reasons that, or some of the reasons that people go to the movies, which is to have fun watching gadgets and gizmos and good-looking people and travel. I mean, one of the hallmarks of the series is how many different beautiful places James Bond goes. So this one at the beginning, he's sailing in the Mediterranean, and he gets to this charming mountain town in Italy. Later, he's in the Caribbean. He's up, in some kind of beautiful sort of fjord in Norway. So there's a lot of I think vicarious pleasure that you get from James Bond. It's like, you want to be as cool as him, you want to look as good in a tuxedo, you want to be able to drink a martini and still dispatch a room full of bad guys. You want to have all the sort of the romance and adventure right at your fingertips, and I think that in a way never gets old.
I know one of the things you're looking forward to this season, The French Dispatch. Why should we look forward to that?
Well, this is the latest Wes Anderson movie. This is one that was held back by the pandemic. It was supposed to open the Cannes Film Festival in 2020, a festival that didn't really happen, and is now kind of coming off the shelf and into the theaters. I don't think it's a movie that will change anybody's mind about Wes Anderson. It's a very, very Wes Anderson movie. It's very kind of the negative way to say it would be precious. It's very aesthetically meticulous. It's about a magazine that's sort of vaguely inspired by The New Yorker, and presents itself as an anthology of classic pieces from that magazine. It has an extraordinary cast. Just about everybody you can think of is in it. Jeffrey Wright, Bill Murray, Frances McDormand, Léa Seydoux, Timothée Chalamet. The list goes on. And it's a very, some might say, aggressively charming movie that is for me a kind of a perfect piece of escapism, because it just takes you out of this world that we live in, which is kind of can be a pretty awful place, and into a very stylized, magical, beautifully art directed, exquisitely written world for a couple of hours, and so I found it very amusing and cheering. I mean, I don't think it's a great movie, but I think it's, especially for people whose tastes are inclined toward Wes Anderson, a very pleasing one.
And Bergman Island also on your list.
Yeah, Bergman Island is a fascinating movie, sort of for and about movie nerds of a certain kind. It's directed by Mia Hansen-Løve, French filmmaker, very, very interesting French filmmaker. And it's about a couple who are both filmmakers, played by Vicky Krieps and Tim Roth, who go to, I'm not going to pronounce it right, but this island in Sweden, Färöa, where Ingmar Bergman famously lived and worked and had a succession of marriages and a great many children, and made some of his classic films. So it's a kind of a movie about movies, about how we tell stories, how we use movies, both as spectators and maybe as artists, to kind of make sense of our lives and the limits of that project. It's very funny. It's kind of psychologically complex. It's very romantic in a way, and part of the romance that it's exploring is the romance of film.
How do we explain Clint Eastwood's durability?
I just think he doesn't, he doesn't quit. He's Clint Eastwood. I think in a way the question answers itself, and he's 91 years old, playing a character in Cry Macho who's probably 20 years younger, an old guy, but maybe not quite as old a guy. And I think the thing about Clint Eastwood as a filmmaker is he just he's kind of achieved a level of mastery, and of also having nothing to prove. So this movie, Cry Macho, is a very quiet Clint Eastwood movie. It's a very, it's very leisurely with its plot. It may seem a little bit kind of thin or insubstantial, but it's just a chance to hang out with Clint Eastwood and just, watch him be grumpy and funny and wise, and just kind of watch this sort of wonderfully effortless, simple classical style of filmmaking that is his signature. And he always feels to me like kind of the last representative of that sort of old-fashioned classic Hollywood style.
Very quickly, if there's one movie you're looking forward to this fall, what would it be?
One movie that I'm really looking forward to coming out, although I have already seen it, is a Western directed by Jane Campion called The Power of the Dog, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, both an old-fashioned widescreen Technicolor Western and also something very new and interesting in the genre. So that's definitely one to look out for.
Forward to that, and look forward to you joining us again. Tony Scott of the New York Times, and for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I am Sam Roberts.